Welcome to the deep dive. Ever stop to think about how basic tech choices, like an OS update,
Mm.
can actually tell us a lot about bigger ideas, philosophy, even commerce?
Well, if you have, you're definitely in the right place today.
We've gathered a bunch of sources, all looking at one specific event from late 2025,
Mm.
the release of Ubuntu 25.10, the questing Quokka. And what we found paints this really interesting picture of, well, conflict.
Yeah, it's a perfect subject for a deep dive, actually, because the sources don't just treat it as a standard update. They frame it as like a snapshot of two major ongoing debates.
Right. What are those?
First, there's this tension between pushing for the latest, greatest tech modernization and what users actually find, usable day to day.
Okay, modernization versus usability.
Exactly. And second, maybe even more fundamental, is this whole high-stakes discussion around software licensing. Who gets to control the code that everything else is built on?
Got it. So that's our mission today, really, to unpack those two things using this Ubuntu release as a lens. We'll start with the desktop changes, the apps you see, and then we'll dig deeper into the core system tools, because that's where this licensing fight, copyleft versus permissive, gets really fascinating.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let's kick off with the desktop experience, stuff you interact with directly. Ubuntu 25.2 meant upgrading from GNOME 48 to GNOME 49. Pretty standard so far.
Right, a version bump.
But the sources immediately zoom in on these specific application replacements. New default apps pushed out with the update, all aimed at, well, modernizing things.
And it's important to say the developers' stated goal wasn't just change for change's sake. They were trying to move to more modern code bases, things easier to maintain long-term, potentially more secure.
Makes sense. So what were the specific swaps?
Okay, so we saw Showtime come in for the video player, Totem. Then Papers replaced the document viewer, Events.
Ah, Vince. Yeah, I know that one.
Loop took over from Eye of Genome for images,
Uh-huh.
and Petixis replaced the classic Genome terminal.
So on the surface, that sounds pretty good, right? Out with the old, potentially aging code, in with the shiny new, supposedly better maintained stuff.
You'd think so. But this is where the sources drop a really interesting observation about how people actually use software. The user writing about this, despite knowing the technical reasons, they didn't stick with the new defaults.
Oh, really? Which ones did they ditch?
They specifically called out reverting back to Events, the document viewer, and Eye of GNOME, the image viewer.
Huh. So much for shiny and new. Why? What was the problem?
It really boils down to that user experience dilemma. New code might be objectively better from a developer standpoint, cleaner, uses newer libraries, whatever.
Right. Easier to manage for them.
Exactly. But for the person just trying to view a PDF or quickly check an image, if the workflow changes or features disappear or it just feels slower.
Then the technical benefit doesn't matter much.
Precisely. The author basically said they missed the established way of doing things. Familiarity trumped the promise of modernization. They went back to what worked for them.
I wouldn't have guessed a PDF viewer would be such a contentious point, but it makes sense. Familiarity is huge. What was it about Papers that made events feel essential? Was it features? Speed?
It seems like a mix. The source mentions workflow disruption. Maybe Papers looked cleaner, sure, but perhaps it lacked specific annotation tools Events had, or it took a fraction of a second longer to load, or a common keyboard shortcut changed.
Little things that add up.
Yeah, those subtle workflow things you build up over years. If you rely on, say, super fast document loading for quick reviews, and the new tool hesitates, that modern code base doesn't help your deadline.
That really is the classic aha moment, isn't it?
Right.
We often assume technically superior code automatically means a superior user experience.
But it's not always true.
The moment it disrupts how someone efficiently gets their work done, those back-end benefits just evaporate for the user.
Yeah.
You're optimizing for the code, not the person using it, not their muscle memory.
Well put.
Okay, so struggling with the new PDF viewer is, an inconvenience. Annoying, but maybe not world-changing. But the sources show this Ubuntu upgrade also involves something much deeper, a change right down at the foundations, affecting software philosophy itself. Let's shift from the desktop apps to the core command line tools.
Ah, yes, the core tools replacement.
Exactly, replacing the standard new core utils with Rust core tools. This is a big one.
It's profoundly significant, yeah. We're talking about the absolute basic tools, ls, cp, mv, the commands that underpin almost everything you do in a terminal.
And from a tech perspective, the sources say this move to Rust core tools was actually welcome, right, because of Rust itself.
That's right. Purely technically, switching these core tools to Rust is seen as a positive step.
Why Rust specifically? What's the advantage there for these kinds of tools?
Memory safety. It's the big one. The traditional new corridors are written in C.
Which has its quirks.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
C is powerful but notoriously prone to memory-related errors, like buffer overflows. These can lead to crashes or, worse, security vulnerabilities. Rust is designed from the ground up to prevent these kinds of errors at compile time.
So switching to Rust is essentially making the system's foundation more robust, fewer potential security holes.
Exactly. It's a significant security upgrade,
Right.
potentially future-proofing the system against a whole class of bugs that have plagued C-based software for decades.
That should be a clear win for the user.
Should be. But there's always a but, isn't there? The sources pivot hard here. This technical win gets completely overshadowed by the licensing change.
This is where it gets really interesting philosophically.
The original Nuclear utils are licensed under the GNU General Public License, version 3, GPL v3. Strong copyleft.
Right. Meaning if you modify and distribute it, you have to share your changes under the same terms. Keep it free.
But the new, safer Rust-based Rustcore utils, they chose the MIT license.
A permissive license. Very different
I
philosophy.
mean, this is where we step away from just code safety and into, well, what the sources frame as ideological warfare.
Absolutely. The choice of MIT isn't random. The sources interpret it very clearly as a move driven by commercial pragmatism.
Pragmatism. The idea is that the MIT license encourages wider adoption. Because it's so permissive, basically just requires attribution, it makes it much easier for anyone, including commercial companies building proprietary software, to take Rust core utils, integrate it, modify it, and use it without having to share their own code back.
Unlike GPL v3, which would force them to open source their modifications if they distributed the combined product.
Precisely. GPL v3 insists on that reciprocal sharing the copyleft. MIT says, take it, use it, good luck. This appeals hugely to businesses operating in the proprietary space.
Hold on, though. If the Rust tools are technically safer, isn't sticking with the GPL v3 potentially holding back security improvements just for ideological reasons? Like, are we prioritizing the license over safer code by not wanting the MIT version? Do the sources wrestle with that?
They imply it's a really difficult trade-off. On one side, you have the free software movement's deep commitment to user freedom, enforced by copyleft. On the other, you have the tangible benefit of safer code written in Rust.
And the developers writing that safer code might prefer MIT.
Well, the sources suggest it links to developer career paths, too. Developers working on or wanting to work with proprietary systems often find MIT easier. It fits better with the business models they encounter. So there's a pragmatic pull towards MIT from both the companies using the code and potentially some developers writing it.
So when the sources call this pragmatic, who's the pragmatism really benefiting most? Is it the average user getting safer tools, or is it the big companies that can now use these core tools without GPL obligations?
The sources definitely suggest the arrow points more towards commercial entities. Let's be clear. GPL v3 forces sharing of improvements, keeping the freedom aspect alive, that's copyleft. MIT basically just asks for a credit in the license file.
So a company can take MIT licensed Rust cartels, build amazing proprietary features on top.
Wrap it up, sell it, and never release their source code for those enhancements. That lack of restriction is exactly what makes it attractive for wider commercial uptake.
Which brings us right to the heart of it, this philosophical clash the sources detail. The open source initiative, OSI, versus the free software movement, FSM.
Yes, this is the core tension. The MIT license fits perfectly with the OSI's general approach. Pragmatic, business-friendly, focused on getting the code used widely, visibility and utility are key.
But the FSM sees things differently.
Very differently. From the FSM perspective, strong copyleft licenses like the GPL v3 are the only real way to guarantee user freedom long-term. They see permissive licenses like MIT as opening the door to proprietary capture, essentially undermining the whole point.
And the FSM is feeling the heat right now, according to these sources. They state pretty clearly that as open source has become more commercially popular, there's significant commercial pressure on copyleft.
Pressure coming directly from the proprietary software industry.
Where does that pressure show up most obviously?
A prime example is the software as a service, or SaaS, model. This is where companies run software, often modified open source software, on their own soldiers and just sell access to it over the web.
Right. And why does SAS get around the GPL-v3's requirements?
Because the main trigger for GPL-v3 obligations is conveying or distributing the software itself. If a company heavily modifies a GPL-v3 tool but only uses it internally to power their cloud service.
They aren't technically distributing the modified software to the customer, just the service from it.
Exactly. So in many common interpretations, they don't have to release their internal modifications. This massively weakens the FSM's goal of ensuring users can always get, study, change, and share the software they rely on, even if it's running on someone else's server.
This isn't new, this commercial opposition. The sources mention a specific strategy, a pattern: embrace, extend, extinguish, EE.
Yes, a classic, almost infamous pattern associated with how large tech companies sometimes neutralize competing or emerging technologies, including open source ones.
And the author provides some modern examples of how this EE pattern might be playing out with open source components today.
They do. These examples really highlight how a proprietary layer built on top of an open core can end up dominating the user experience and locking people in.
Like Linux.
Like Linux via the Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL. Microsoft embraced Linux by allowing it to run within Windows. They extended it with tight integration into the Windows ecosystem, tools, and development flows.
And the extinguish part.
The potential extinguish is that for many developers or users, WSL becomes good enough. They might stop seeking a native Linux environment, staying within the Windows fold, diminishing the reach or necessity of standalone Linux installs for certain tasks.
Okay, another example.
Git versus GitHub. Git itself is the open source version control system, totally free. GitHub embraced Git, then extended it massively with a proprietary web interface, collaboration tools, project management, CI/CD pipelines, a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, GitHub is way more than just Git hosting.
Right. And those extensions, the pull request interface, the issue tracking, the actions become so central to how teams work that while Git underneath is free, the effective environment people live in is GitHub's proprietary platform.
The wrapper becomes dominant, moving people away from just using raw, open Git, perhaps.
That's the concern. And the third example given is the Chromium browser versus Chrome.
Ah, yeah. Chromium is the open source engine.
That Google embraced. Then they extended it into Chrome, adding their proprietary services, sync features, user tracking, specific integrations.
Which made Chrome the dominant browser by far.
Exactly. The open core Chromium exists, but the extended proprietary version, Chrome, is what most people use, often relying on its specific non-open features. Again, embrace the open core, extend with proprietary value adds, and potentially extinguish the need or desire for alternatives based purely on the open core.
So, seeing this pattern, the author poses a really crucial question, though. If Rust Kurytls, with its permissive MIT license, becomes the standard, fully replacing the GPL-v3 new Kurytls,
what does that mean for the future of the free software movement?
the implication is pretty chilling. Does the MIT license basically pave the way for these foundational tools to be easily embraced, extended, and potentially extinguished by proprietary systems, starting that EE cycle right at the very heart of the OS?
That's precisely the fear articulated in the sources. If the absolute bedrock tools are MIT licensed, they become incredibly easy for commercial interests to just absorb and build upon without giving back. It removes the friction, the obligation that GPL-v3 imposed.
So a shift from copyleft to permissive at this foundational level, even if driven by good technical reasons like Rust safety, could be seen as effectively clearing a path for commercial dominance of the ecosystem, potentially weakening the long-term viability of software freedom as envisioned by the FSM.
Wow. So this deep dive really shows how even seemingly mundane updates can reveal these massive underlying tensions. Two really clear ones emerge from looking at Ubuntu 25.10.
First, that constant push-pull between technical modernization, new code, new features, and the actual usability, the familiarity that users need to just get stuff done.
Yeah, the desktop app replacements highlighted that perfectly.
And second, maybe more profoundly, this intense commercial pressure on the idea of copyleft. Moving core yields from GPL-v3 to MIT isn't just a license swap in a text file.
No, it's a significant indicator. It shows how strong the drive is to make foundational software easy for commercial use, even if that compromises the philosophical aims of movements dedicated to software freedom. And as the author notes, only time will really tell how this plays out. It's an ongoing battle.
Absolutely. These basic system upgrades, they're not just tech news. They're battlegrounds for the philosophy and the commercial control of the software we all use. The code might be safer in Rust.
But the philosophy, the freedom aspect, might be more fragile under MIT.
So we'll leave you left, listener, with a final thought to chew on. Think about how the license chosen for tools you probably never even consciously run those core utilities. How that choice directly shapes the future landscape of software freedom.
Every time a foundational piece shifts from something like GPL to something like MIT, the ground under the feet of movements fighting for that freedom shifts, maybe just a little. It's worth exploring how those choices, way down in the system, ultimately affect whether the software you depend on remains truly yours to control, modify, and share.